Welcome to DeepGram's Voice of the Future podcast, aka Our Favorite Nerds. At DeepGram, we're obsessed with voice, and this podcast is our exploration of the exciting emerging world of voice technology. I'm your host today, Sam Zegas, VP of Operations at DeepGram, and our guest is Pete Ellis, CPO at Redbox. Pete, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. Good to be here.
Pete, this is, of course, Our Favorite Nerds, and I generally start by asking people what kind of nerd you are.
Not totally sure I'm a nerd, but I suppose I'm a techno nerd. Yeah, I'm quite old now, but I still get heavily involved. I sit on the board at Redbox, but I still get involved in development and can we push voice around a millisecond quicker, or can we deal with another 100,000 calls? That kind of level. So I suppose I'm still a techno nerd, so I do get heavily involved in our R&D. So to a certain degree, even though I'm probably twice as old as our developers.
Tell me a little bit about your background then. How did you get into this line of work?
Sure, yeah. I mean, for a good 30 years plus now, I've been really in telephony and contact centers. I started off with a company in the 90s doing CTI, so computer telephony integration. So that's sort of a great grounding in understanding telephony, call control, how contact centers work, how telephony systems work. And ever since then, I've worked in companies around voice and voice architecture and contact centers, whether it's in service providers, systems integrators, or vendors like Redbox. And probably our biggest experience was 6 years at Avaya. So there's some good years where Avaya was really, I suppose, ruling the world in terms of contact centers. And then came to Redbox in 2016. Really, because I could see sort of where I suppose there was a gap where they're collecting all this valuable information, but we're only really using it for compliance and regulation and not sort of doing anything more meaningful with this staggering amounts of information we're capturing. And some customers are capturing over 1 million calls a day. That's a staggering amount of content that is just being monitored but not used. So I saw it as an opportunity, and it was really at the start of this revolution of AI 6 years ago.
That's a fascinating career arc to be in during a time of digital transformation, because of all the ways that digital transformation has changed a lot of different sectors. Going from analog telephony into the world of digital voice platforms must really have been an interesting change.
It is, but it's, I suppose it was quite slow. I was at it right from the very beginnings, and at the height of tech as well. But these changes happen slow because voice is, I suppose, the adoption and the use of voice around the world is staggering. So that change from from analog to digital to IP, it takes its time. Although I think we are going through another shift, certainly as we're going to talk about today in AI, and that certainly it's going through an inflection point and a definite shift over this last year to 18 months for various reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, well, we'll be talking a lot more about trends in the market and AI as we get deeper into the conversation. But first, since some of our listeners might not be familiar with Redbox, why don't you tell us a bit about what you do there?
Sure, yeah. So I'm responsible for our product strategy and also our partnership strategy. In this new world, partnerships is really what it's all about, certainly in terms of providing most value to customers. So Redbox is quite a long-standing company. We've been running over 30 years now, really born out of compliance recording. One of probably the top 5 companies in the world that provide compliance recording. And I suppose the breadth is what we provide is quite significant. So we provide it across telephony systems, contact centers, which is, again, what we'll probably talk about a lot today, but also the complex areas. So trading floors, that's quite a complex telephony environment. Emergency services, so that's sort of command and control systems connected to radio networks, as well as also mobile networks. So it's really taking all that data and applying compliance policies around it so that our customers can meet their regulations. And that's what we've been doing for about, as I say, the last 30 years. We sort of had a change about 4 or 5 years ago as we started to see the advent of the transcription of voice becoming more ubiquitous, the quality where it needs to be, the speed of where it needs to be. We could start to see that, as I said at the very start, we're sitting on this collection of data that's our customers' data that's not really being fully utilized and not really understanding what values can be driven from it. So the last 4 or 5 years, we started to position ourselves to be that sort of liberator of this data. It's not something we've ever seen as ours, it's our customers' data, but how can we liberate this data of the highest quality, as much metadata, and how then we get that data to where the customer can derive value from it. And there's quite a lot of complexities in doing that. And that's where we've sort of been morphing. We still do compliance recording, it's still a requirement in the market, but that need to be that gateway layer to this massive data throughout organizations is quite a significant undertaking. And so we've been shifting our organization over the last 4 or 5 years for that. Hence why partnerships is important. So, we're the liberator of it, but then somebody has to do something with it.
That message really resonates with me. The framing of your product as a liberator of the data. Our experience at DeepGram is that voice is this huge untapped data source that's constantly being generated and used, pun intended, fluently by people who prefer to speak to each other when they need to communicate. But machines have really been locked out of that. And so liberating the value and the content of that speech data so that it is available to machines and available to AI is a theme that comes out quite a lot here as well.
Yeah, what people don't understand is, I think everybody thinks since voice moved to IP that it's quite easy to extract. Two challenges there. The actual IP side of it isn't that difficult, and there's some semi-standards out there for capturing it. But that audio data is only one part of it. The next piece is also metadata. So what's that conversation about? And there's just no standards for that piece. So that's what makes this quite complex. Especially when most customers have multiple different systems, they have collaboration systems like Zoom and Teams, as well as a contact center, as well as some telephony system, as well as some mobile systems. So it's not straightforward.
Not at all. Yeah, it's really a frontier of research for us and for a lot of companies to figure out how to understand intent and understand topic and identify, or I guess think about how you would summarize a conversation that's being had between people.
It's a good point. Sorry, in the early days, I suppose in certainly in terms of things like transcription, people were, let's say, taking high quality audio in stereo, because you need that to understand both sides who's speaking. A lot of the analysis was based on keyword searching, but since then, with emotion, it then takes it up that contextual stack to really get to understand that what's happening in that conversation in terms of intent and real understanding. So you can then start to accelerate your understanding of either your customer or your agents. And we've seen that shift over the last 4 or 5 years. It's been quite significant.
No, you're absolutely right. And I would dig in there and say one of the things that we research a lot at DeepGram currently is the idea that keyword searching as an approach for understanding, which has gotten us this far at least, is really inadequate for the needs of businesses, the needs of people generally, because you can say the same keyword in 2 different intonations and it will mean something very different. And a human knows how to understand that intrinsically, but a machine does not until you have trained an AI system to be able to disambiguate.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's quite a big difference out there in those that, just doing the basics. And to be fair, the basics are good as well. There's good use cases for the basics, but I think once we start getting good contextual analysis of the conversations, that's where you really are starting to drive the value. And we can go into some of those use cases as we move along. But really interesting to see. And it's happened quick. In real terms, I think going from TDM to IP took years, and some people are still on old telephony lines. But certainly in terms of AI or machine learning, really has accelerated, definitely, certainly the last 2 years. And we did a recent survey that shows it's accelerated even more than we've even thought, even though we've started really seeing it drive really quickly. We did a recent survey about, it was a sort of a campaign called Being Human. So, how can machines get to the point where you're replacing some of those activities that humans are doing? And we've seen over 800 customers that 30%, or on average, they were using 30% were using AI today, or voice AI, which I thought was quite staggering because it certainly was nowhere near that 4 years ago.
Yeah, it really is. So I know that you serve a number of different sectors: healthcare, public safety, government, financial services, and others as well. What common themes do you see in the use cases, or what common needs do you see among them?
Sure. I think we've gone through quite a lot of use cases over the last 4 or 5 years, and a lot of what we've done has been in compliance. So a lot of those use cases in the early years was around compliance and surveillance of traders and of agents. What we've seen more recently in the last 2 years, sort of explosion, is really in the contact centers around knowing your customer and customer service. So the whole context of how you deal with your customer and how you provide service to your customer on one side, and there's quite a plethora of use cases and requirements there. And on the other side is how you really get more out of your agents. So essentially, how do you make every agent your best agent? Whether that's through analysis or some real-time coaching. And that's probably one of the biggest shifts we've seen more recently, is the agent side as opposed to just the customer side. Most people start on the customer side and then move down, but those are the two key pieces, because historically, the customer side was done through CSATs, NPSs, customer surveys, and the agent side was done through quality management systems or spreadsheets and listening to phone calls. Neither of these two things are representative across their whole organization, and they can't analyze every customer either. So they're all quite restricted and quite specific in areas, and quite manual and quite labor intensive. So they're sort of geared up to look at how can we automate, how can we do that better. But those are the two key themes. There's loads of niche pieces here and there, but those are the sort of two blocks that we see moving forward.
Interesting. So it sounds like some of the value that you provide comes from asynchronous speech processing, but there are other things that you provide that really depend on a real-time use case. Is that right?
Okay, yeah, real-time really is. We started looking at real-time probably a good 3 years ago. The problem was there was nobody there really to do anything with it. So we could provide it and support it, but then you need some application to take that and do something with it and do some kind of next best action. But more recently, agent assist we've seen exploding, and you got to think, what's some of the biggest challenges in contact centers? It's attrition of agents and training of agents. As I said before, you want every agent to be your best agent, and the only real way of doing that is through training and coaching. Whereas real-time analysis of conversations gives you, for every single agent in your contact center, a way of coaching and guiding agents in real time based on a set of metrics that you've seen over time is the best, I suppose, the best way of an agent can perform for a customer, and also supplement training, because there's that training time when new agents go on board. It's once they get it completely right, it's a staggering innovation and cost justification, business improvement going forward, because we deal with contact centers in thousands. The attrition and the training is a complete nightmare. It really is, and in no way is every agent their best agent, nowhere near. And this gets you a step further, because manual QM is good, and workflows for monitoring and managing your agents is good, but you can only take a selection. Our customers, as I say, are taking up to 1 million calls a day. It's impossible. If you had 1,000 supervisors looking at calls, it's just impossible. We sort of saw that in the early days in trading floors. Trading floors take a staggering amount of calls, very short calls, and as part of regulation, they have to monitor those calls. And again, and when we MiFID in the early days, that boundary moved from, I think, 5% to potentially towards 20%, and it's just impossible. You have to automate. So that sort of forced it. But now real-time agent assist, it's very interesting. But the challenge then, for every step of the way, so for ourselves and yourselves, is can we have the least delay in that chain? When I talked at the very start about milliseconds, that's really important to us. Can we shave off 50 milliseconds on how fast we send it to you, to DeepGram, and then can DeepGram analyze that, transcribe it within sub-second and in milliseconds before it then goes to the analytics, because it all adds in that chain. And if it goes over, I don't know, 250 milliseconds, you'll see that interruption at the desktop. So it's a very interesting area, real time.
Yeah, we've seen a dramatic uptick in interest in real-time applications, our real-time service that we offer at DeepGram over the last couple of years. And the two things that really stand out to me are both how critically important the response time is. And we put a lot of effort into making sure that we're the fastest solution we can possibly be, the fastest out there. And then, but really getting a highly accurate transcript the first time, including the ability to get custom branded terms or industry jargon correct in that live real-time transcription that's being delivered. Those are very interesting challenges to us and things that we know are really critical to making those systems worthwhile to customers.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not just, yeah, it's the speed, it's the accuracy, it's the configuration. So you've got to be able to put in those custom terms, and that's not easily available. And the sort of the compute size of that. Don't forget, there's a cost behind here as well, whether it's in the cloud or on premise. The cost factor is just as crucial to customers. So it's getting that compute footprint down as well, because now we're all doing something that's quite CPU intensive, whether you're doing the ASR in your area, we're doing the capturing ours, or you're doing the analytics somewhere in the cloud. It's staggeringly CPU intensive. So you've got to make those services as performant as they can be. And yeah, milliseconds count. I know in the real world, you need a portion of a call to make some sense out of it. But again, you're still going to make each piece as performant as it can be. And we're a small player, so we go up against very big players. So for us, we have to be the best. No, it's a difficult world, that, because when you say, do you have to send it that quickly and perform that quickly? Possibly not, but it improves the downstream vendors like yourselves and the analytics, who can deliver as fast as possible.
Let's dig into that point a little bit deeper.
Sure.
What else is difficult about what you deliver? Obviously, you're right at the cutting edge in order to compete in the industry that you're in. And you've talked about speed as one of the things that is difficult and that you need to deliver on. What are the other things that make it difficult to do what you do?
Sure. I think, so there's 2 or 3 things you need, certainly in our space, that flows downstream to the ASR and then to the analytics. If we haven't done our job, it really makes everybody downstream not look very good. So firstly, we have to capture it at high quality, so uncompressed. And for that, you need to then have the flexibility of where you capture these audio conversations. Because sometimes you're beholden to the platform you're capturing from, but you can mitigate that by capturing that traffic at different points in the network. So that's step 1. 2, you have to be capturing in stereo. So if we're talking about audio, it has to be in stereo, because you have to guarantee who's speaking to who's speaking at any one point in time. And unless you're doing it in stereo, you can't guarantee that. You can try, but you can't. And again, that is about flexibility where you capture, and when you can capture stereo, because at some point that call is in stereo, typically. And then the metadata. And this is the challenge, because all telephony, contact centers, trading floors, they all operate completely differently in terms of metadata. There is no standard. And it's all different. And being able to marry that metadata up with that conversation is easy when you've got 10 or 100 calls, but not when you've got 1 million calls. That's really, really difficult. Plus then, if customers have, as I say, they have a front office contact center, they have a back office telephony environment, they've also got Teams for their collaboration, and they've got AT&T for their mobiles. How do you then track a customer that's maybe gone from the front office to the back office, or gone through to a mobile teleworker or a mobile field worker? How do you track all that and all the associated metadata when there's this much load on the system? And then, so you're doing that in real time, and then how can you get that in real time to where the customer wants it to go, which is really to deep ground, to transcribe to then out, or even post call. It says the same problem post call real time. Real time just adds another performance hit in there.
Another thing that I imagine is really difficult working at the scale that you work is that when you're talking about a call center that processes millions of calls, you're dealing with almost that same number of different speech idiosyncrasies, people calling them with different accents and dialects, and to be able to take that sort of complexity and distill it down to text that is accurate is actually quite a difficult thing.
Yeah, but that's really where Deepgram comes into play. Not so much Redbox. And I think the challenge that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years is that, if you don't mind me saying, there's a finite capability in those that have gone down the open source route in terms of how fast and how quick you can do that to the level of accuracy that the market now needs. And I think for me anyway, the fact that Deepgram built this from the ground up for this purpose, it allows you to scale. As I say, contact centers are not really getting any smaller. And for those that are saying your voice is not really the main channel anymore, it used to be going down about 1% a year for many years, but then since the COVID period, we've seen it go and because you've got a lot more online organizations, contact centers are growing bigger and faster. So the amount of data we're capturing and delivering is just staggering. Well, if you put it in this way, each call takes, I don't know, it's around 20 or 30,000 packets of data on average. So put that against 1 million calls, so that's billions of packets a day that we're having to capture, formulate, send to DeepGram for you then to build your models against it and get all that sent out in milliseconds. Yeah, that's the difference. I think in this new world is the levels of volume that we're seeing now. It's far surpassed what we used to see years ago. And we operated a lot more in the mid-market space historically, and more so in the tier 1 enterprises now. But even so, we've still seen that shift. Especially now, certainly with AI, you can do a lot more with your contact center, and especially if you're making every agent your best agent, sales performance, which is a big driver for AI at the moment, is sort of getting quite a big resurgence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can really see clearly that companies that don't adopt the latest speech technology in their call center, I would expect them to see a hit to the performance of their agents as time goes on. There are probably a lot of ways that they will start feeling pain if they don't adopt these innovations as they come out.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because there's lots of reasons why you would do it, and there's lots of benefits, but you are making what was done previously a lot better and a lot more complete, a lot more, I suppose, consistency. So your consistency before was in your surveys and your CSAT scores, so your feedback from the customers via whatever means you were doing, or through your manual monitoring of your agents. But the consistency only comes in terms of how you communicate to that customer in that instance, or how each supervisor is reviewing those agents. There isn't any consistency. Whereas from a machine perspective, it's always consistent. Mm-hmm. It has a set of rules. It's built up a set of trends across data across the contact center. Don't forget, it's not just data across the top in contact centers. It's all this CRM data as well that it has to hand. Supervisor doesn't have that. Customer doesn't have that. So it's putting all this extra data together along with that personal conversation. You're getting performance, you're getting alignment to the trends, and you're getting consistency. And also, what we've seen, actually, one thing very interesting we've seen with a customer very recently, we had an issue with sending this data out. Nobody's perfect. And we noticed the effect it had on that customer's day-to-day operations. So we're using one of our partners, AI partners, was analyzing it. And it affected the way they could move agents and workload and messages out to their customers instantly. It affected them completely. And we didn't realize, the impact this was having on our customers until we saw it when we failed to deliver some audio for a period of time. There was a link issue between ourselves and the cloud. But yeah, it affected their ability to be reactive. And if you think, can you think of manual-based performing contact centers? Can they really be reactive that well?
Right.
Because their contact center could be spread across multiple locations, and especially these days, most of the workers are at home. So are they seeing the trends that are coming in? Something's happening, and they need to react. AI sees it.
Yeah.
Sorry, feels I'm preaching for AI.
No, yeah, I actually want to go there next. You've mentioned a couple of times that there's been dramatic transformation in the market due to AI recently. What do you see there, and how does AI fit into your solution?
We've seen a massive ramp. I suppose we've seen it because as well as we're still doing compliance recording, but we've come into this self-fulfillment engine with this plumbing or this gateway to give everybody access. Even if they've got existing recording platforms in there, we still come in to provide access to high quality audio and so forth and metadata. We've seen a massive ramp up of that. And I think we've seen it over the years, but I think what's happening with a lot of the partners that are doing the analytics is they're starting to get to a level of scale now that they didn't have before. So I think over the last 2 or 3 years, they were doing projects and they were taking departments, and they're starting now to see that they've had such an impact in those departments, it's going wider. So that's then when they come to us. I think when it's on a small scale, they're able to get this information in batch or collated manually in some way, shape or form, and it sort of works. But once you start to get into the 500 plus and 1,000 seats, that you've got to be getting it automatically and a lot more consistently across the enterprise. So we've seen it because of that. although these companies have been around for the last 2 or 3 years, they've started stepping up in how much they're delivering now. So they're delivering millions of hours of analytics a year instead of thousands. But I must admit, it was quite surprised to see the survey we did across the 800 customers. I didn't expect 30% of those 800 customers to already deploying this technology. So I suppose the danger for those that aren't is, being left behind to a certain degree, and incurring greater costs because you're still doing it manual and you're still only touching parts of your contact center, and a lot of them are cost centers. So the costs are quite important.
Anytime I am thinking about AI, I'm also thinking about the problem of bias that gets introduced into AI systems based on the data that they're exposed to through training. How do you think about bias and how do you manage it?
Oh, I suppose that sits out of our realm. So we're fulfiller of the data. All we can do is ensure that we don't miss a call because we come from the compliance world. And that's a really important thing. But B, that it's of the highest quality, that there's no mistakes in the transcription, or it's as good as it can be, and it's in stereo, so you haven't got any issues in terms of who's speaking, but also the extra metadata. So we can help. We can't deal with it any more than just provide everything as accurate as we can do, to be honest.
Yeah, so in the ecosystem that you are part of, it's really a responsibility of the end recipient of your product to understand how bias may be present in the sort of analysis that they're doing, I imagine.
Yeah, I suppose it's also a learning curve for them because they've all come up through quite basic analytics on that data to really getting far more contextual with it and taking more feeds of data surrounding that, so they're not getting biased or they're not getting incorrect results out of it. And they're taking bigger data sets now. As you know, bigger data sets really improve the accuracy of what you're delivering. So I suppose that's what we're seeing. But it really has only been this last year, I think, in terms of the bigger data sets. It's been quite at the small end. So yeah, I think that bias is changing somewhat.
Something else you mentioned earlier that I was interested in was a statistic that said that for a while it seemed like the use of voice was decreasing over time by 1% a year or something like that. And yet it seems as though that trend may be reversing itself, or voice may be having some sort of a resurgence now. What do you see happening in that trend?
Well, it definitely was. If you looked at the analyst reports, it seemed to be going down about 1% a year, which is not exactly, it's not massive compared to the amount of actual telephony systems there are out there. But certainly, over the last 2 years, because of things like COVID, we've seen it come back. But I think what's compounded that on top of that then is now then seeing what they can do with this data. Because it still is although we did this research and there's 30% are using it, I still think it seems a black art. A lot of our customers don't know how to get access to their audio calls. So I think the fact that that's changing and they're seeing what other people are doing, that's sort of fostering that this is a lot of interesting data and we can actually improve our sales, improve our customer services, improve our relationship with our customer without deploying these channels that perhaps are not giving us closer a relationship or as closer an interaction as voice would, especially if you can make all your agents, your best agents. That's a big change then from having the concern that an interaction with a poor agent is worse than an interaction, let's say, with a bot.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I had not seen that statistic that you cited before. However, I have been aware of this sort of seeming cultural narrative around why it is that people might move away from voice. It's more convenient, especially for the youngest generations who don't want to get on the phone and have a live conversation. Maybe they want to use a chatbot or something. And certainly that movement helped certain kinds of products to improve themselves, but we didn't see that it completely crushed voice. There is absolutely a stable need and a need that may be growing over time for really high quality voice experiences. And using tools like yours, we can continue to improve the quality of the kind of interactions that people could have through voice.
Yeah, agreed. I think chatbots, chatbots have their position, and certainly for automating things, brilliant. And if you want to do a simple task, great. The problem with chatbots is when they go wrong, and the damage they cause in customer service when they do go wrong. For me, obviously from a cost perspective, it's a lot less cost on a chatbot. But now you're you're sort of changing the paradigm of an agent, and a lot of them are selling these days, let's be honest. You're sort of turning the capabilities of an agent on its head to a certain degree. So that changes the paradigm of this whole taking voice calls, because everybody wanted to obviously reduce the cost of having agents sat in a contact center. You could say also working from home has helped in terms of cost, but definitely has changed the paradigm on what they can do then with these voice conversations. Because you speak to the customer, what better point to upsell, improve service, ensure they're delivering the service that you should be delivering to them. There's nothing better. I think we are seeing a paradigm shift in a contact center agent, what they are and what they can deliver for a company. And that's incredibly exciting. I think it's artificially probably improved because of COVID in terms of those interactions. People, especially during those periods, probably wanting to speak to the vendors they're dealing with. But I think we are definitely seeing that shift because of what this can now deliver. Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's accelerating much faster than I ever thought would happen. And I've been through all the usuals, the IP telephony and the cloud pieces, seeing all these transitions, and they usually take quite some time. They're usually a hype for some time, and then they go back down. But this just seems to be surging, and for good reasons, I think.
Yeah, it's a fascinating trend. Well, we're almost at the end here, but before we go, let's take a minute to remind people how far technology has come, even in our lifetime. So I'm going to ask you to explain a piece of outdated technology that you feel nostalgic for, like you would for a kid who was born after 2010. So this person is about 10 years old. They've lived their whole life on computers, probably in the context of a device that fits in their pocket. So I want you to explain to them how dial-up modems used to work and what you miss about that world.
Yeah, I do miss dial-up modems. I think the challenge, dial-up modem was an event. You had some physical interaction experience with trying to get access to some digital content. You had to wait that minute while it dialed up and connected and negotiated a connection with some endpoint. And you typically only had access to that place there. But the fact that wherever you were in the world, you could connect to something. And as I say, it was an event. These days, everybody gets online, drop of a hat. And there was only a few of us. There were people that were doing remote support or in IT that had access to this. And you either did it through your home phone, for those that don't know, a phone that was plugged into a socket in your wall at home, or you could actually via a cable into your mobile phone. And it was just today isn't very interested getting online, is it? Whereas then it was an event, so you could get access to some form of world. It wasn't really the internet as such, but via this link that you sort of could control because you could hear it. If you had any problems with it, you could hear there was problems with it. So you were sort of quite invested in it. So yeah, I do miss it. Certainly don't miss the speeds. Waiting a month for a gig to download.
That noise of a dial-up modem connecting is so distinctive. And you're right, it did create this sort of drama around an event of, getting on the internet. It's
you could hear the data to a certain degree, which is quite interesting.
Well, Pete, thanks for playing along. And thanks for being one of our favorite nerds, of course. It's been great talking to you.
Yes, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
To all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. Come check us out for more info about Redbox and about DeepGram. You can find them at redboxvoice.com. And of course, you can find us at deepgram.com and on socials at deepgram AI. So with that, we're out. Catch you next time.